Assalamu alaikum. This lecture is for University of Education Lahore, Department of English. Course title is Pakistan Studies. Program name BS English. Course code PAKS Tetra 1. Instructor name Dr. Ibrar Ahmed, who is main teacher of this course, and I am Anil Waqas Khan. In this lecture, we will talk about Bhutto Era from 1972 to 77. We will also discuss about the time period of People's Party when it became into rule, and we will also discuss about the reforms of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and different other perspectives of Bhutto Era will be the part of this lecture. Early life, when we discuss about the early life of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, he was born on 5 January 1928, only son of Sir Shah Nawaz Bhutto. Early education from Bombay Cathedral High School, went to University of Southern California in 1947. Later on went to University of California in June 1949. At the end he went to Oxford. So it was about the life of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and after that his education. Political career. When we talk about the political career of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, so he was a nationalist and socialist. Why we are saying that he was a nationalist? Because he introduced the nationalization of the industries and nationalization of private sector, so that's why we are calling him nationalist. And after that socialist, because he worked in the social values and social structure of the state, and he adopted the values of socialism during his rule and era, so that's why he was a socialist, and we are calling him socialist. After that, youngest member of Pakistan's delegation to the UN. When we talk about the initial initiatives which he took during his political career, he became the youngest member of Pakistan's delegation to the UN. So it was the beginning of his political career. Youngest cabinet minister, he was very popular among the nation, and he was also very popular among the political big wigs in Pakistan, so that's why he became the youngest cabinet minister of Ayub Khan. He became the trusted ally and advisor of Ayub Khan. So due to his vision and acumen and veteran opinions about the state, and due to his concepts about the state, he became the trusted ally and advisor of Ayub Khan. He was very popular among the political personalities and political structure of Pakistan. So due to all his qualities, he became the advisor of Ayub Khan. Role in Indus Valley Treaty, so he played a vital role due to his position in political system and political environment of Pakistan. He played a vital role in the Indus Water Treaty, which was conducted during the era of Ayub Khan, and after that served as a prime minister from 1973 to 1977. So it was the time period when he was elected prime minister of Pakistan. So he became the prime minister from 1977 to 1973 to 1977, and after that, due to the military coup, his government was thrown, and he was sent to the jail. After the military coup, Ziaul Haq became the president of Pakistan, and he was a dictator. So before his took over, so that was the time period of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He also served as the president of Pakistan from 1971 to 73. So it was the time period when he served as a president. He was not the elected president, but he served as a president during this time period. PPP, People's Party in power. First general elections held on 9 December 1970. So it was the first general election in the history of Pakistan, which was held on 9 December 1970, and after that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was he got the popularity, and he was having more seats than Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, but Zulfikar Ali Bhutto refused to accept his majority, and so that's why such type of allegations are attached with the personality of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, that he was responsible for the separation of East Pakistan and West Pakistan. So it was an election which was held, and after that the consequences are very popular among the whole nation, and everyone is aware of this such type of the misconducts. Army was discredited. So when People's Party became into power, they discredited army because there were already two dictators in the history of Pakistan who imposed martial law. So to avoid such type of military coups again, so he discredited the army, and he started to malign army and decrease the morale of the army. But it was not in a right way to do. Morale of the masses was at the lowest ebb. So due to the dictatorship and due to the military coup and due to the separation of East Pakistan, the morale of masses was at lowest ebb. So people were not happy with the government, and they were not happy with the achievements of the governments which were had to rule during the previous time period. He took the reins of the government in December 1971. So it was the time period when he took the oath, and he became the president of Pakistan, and he served for 2 years from 1971 to 1973. Conceptions of Bhutto. The first concept of Bhutto was populism. Masses will rule, so he was in the favor of masses. So he tried to introduce this thing, and he said that masses will rule. He was in the favor of the popular sovereignty, and so that's why he became very famous, and it was the first time in the history of Pakistan that someone introduced such thing, that the masses will rule, and the government will be in the hands of the government, in the hands of the masses. And so that's why he introduced this thing. After that, popularity in middle class due to his concepts and due to his populism theory, he became very popular in middle class because his policies were in the favor of the middle class, made people aware of their power. So he introduced and improvised so many other concepts in the minds of the masses, so that people realize that they can rule, and they can become the rule and become the part of the government. And so that's why due to the concept which was introduced by different philosophers, that government of the people and government for the people and government by the people, so he introduced this thing. Raised the slogan of popular sovereignty. So popular sovereignty is the government of the people. So he introduced this thing, and he raised the slogan of popular sovereignty. So it was also the concept of Bhutto, promised to eradicate feudalism and military tyranny. So it was also a new thing in the history that he introduced this thing, because feudal lords were in power, and they were having control over the government institutions and everything. So that's why he introduced this thing, and he promised to eradicate feudalism. And after that, he also talked about the military tyranny, and he said that he will also eradicate military tyranny from the government, from the state, and so it was also a positive thing about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He declared himself as the voice of the people. So due to his concepts about the masses, he became the voice of the people, and he declared himself as the voice of the people. Socialism, bread, clothing, and housing for everyone. So it was the basic concept of socialism, which was introduced by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So after that, he promised to work for the downtrodden, and his slogan was, in fact, in the favor of this thing, that he will introduce so many things which will be in the favor of downtrodden, the people who were repressed and they were not having their basic needs. So after that, no room for Islam as an ideology due to his philosophy of socialism and his theory of nationalization and other things. He didn't support Islam as an ideology, and after that attainment of classless society, he was in the favor of classless society, and he said that there should be no class in the state, and there must be a society which should be classless. Reforms in industrial sector, he introduced different reforms in industrial sector due to the nationalization, his philosophy of nationalization, and he obviously brought so many other changes in industrial sector. Introduced land reforms, he introduced land reforms to decrease the hegemony of feudal lords, and in fact he was also a feudal lord. He was but he introduced such things, and due to these reforms he became very unpopular among the class of feudal lords, and that's why feudal lords didn't support his government and didn't support him when he was imprisoned, and there was a dictator in the state. Curtailing an autocratic power of bureaucracy. So bureaucrats were also very powerful in the state, and they were very hegemonic, and they were having power. So they were privileged class, and they were also considered to be the elite class of the state, because he was in the favor of classless society. So that's why he tried to eliminate the hegemony of bureaucrats. Islamic socialism, he was not in the favor of Islamic ideology directly, but he introduced something which was Islamic socialism. Let's discuss it one by one. Only as a faith and way of life, he introduced this thing, and he was in the favor of this thing, that the Islam is a faith and the way of life. So we can infer this thing, that he was not in the favor of Islam as to be the political system or the social structure of the society. No ideological priorities, so he didn't give any kind of ideological priority to the Islam. All religions were revolutionary. He said that all religions were revolutionary, and they changed the environment of the states, and they changed the environment of the social values, and so he was not paying any kind of the priority to the Islam. Islam was interlinked with socialism, so he introduced this thing, that Islam was interlinked with socialism. Islam preaches equality. Socialism is modern way to achieve it. So he was not in the favor of Islamic ideology and Islamic environment in the state. Due to this thing, he said that Islam can be the way of the life of the people, and after that he was actually in the favor of the socialism, and he said that socialism can help the people to achieve the Islamic ideologies and Islamic perspectives and way of life. So he gave the priority to the socialism, and he didn't consider Islamic ideology to be the best thing to be adopted in the political and social structure of the society. Bhutto's reforms. When we talk about the Bhutto's reforms, so there was strategy related to army. He introduced some reforms about army. He utilized some things, and he introduced some reforms which were in the favor of the army, and he tried to uh, control the army, and such type of reforms will be discussed in the further slides. Bureaucratic reforms to decrease the hegemony of the bureaucrats. He introduced bureaucratic reforms. Land reforms, when he introduced land reforms to decrease the influence of the feudal lords in the society. Different phases of land reforms. So he introduced land reforms in two different phases, which will be the part of this lecture. Economic reforms to increase the economic condition of the Pakistan, and he introduced some economic reforms which will also be the part of this lecture. Strategy related to army, measures to deter the military coup. So he tried to avoid the military coup again in the state. So he took some measures to avoid such type of circumstances again. Paramilitary force to decrease the hegemony of the army, and he introduced the paramilitary force, which was feudal security force, and he introduced this force just to decrease the influence of the army. This force was very powerful, and they were directly headed by the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He utilized and used this force against his political rivals, and he utilized this force for his personal interests. So due to such type of the biasness of this force, it became very against the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and all the feudal lords and political rivals became very aggressive against such type of the measurements. Raise the morale of the military reforms. So he tried to raise the morale of the military. So he introduced some reforms to do such things, and to get the loyalty of the army. So exemption of military officers from land reforms. So it was the thing that he exempted military officers from the land reforms. They were not falling into these reforms, and they were exempted from such reforms, and they were able to carry lands, and so that's why it was a measure to get the loyalty of the army. Size of military was increased to strengthen the state, and to strengthen the military. He increased the size of the military. Expenditures of the military were also increased. After the 1971 war, he increased the military, and he also increased the expenditures of the military. So it was also the step to get the loyalty of the army, and he raised he gave some such type of the privileges to the military and military officers. Strengthened the army for defense. So due to all these steps, he strengthened the army for defense. Bureaucratic reforms, the supremacy was decreased. He decreased the supremacy of the bureaucrats, and to do such thing, he did some steps which are given below. So first of all, he 1300 bureaucrats were dismissed. So it was the first time in the history of Pakistan, and it was also the last time in the history of Pakistan that 1300 bureaucrats at the same time were dismissed. Unified grade structure. He introduced grade structure to describe the service rules of the bureaucrats, and so it was also to decrease the hegemony of the bureaucrats in the state. hierarchical structure of grades. He introduced hierarchical structure of the grades, so just to decrease the influence of the bureaucrats. After that, Bhutto blamed them for inequalities in the society. So because bureaucrats were privileged class and they were considered to be the elite class of the society, so due to such things there was there were inequalities in the society. So Bhutto blamed them for such type of inequalities. Abolition of their role in policy making. So they were also very influential in the policy making of the state, and they were also controlling the political structure of the state. So that's why he tried to eradicate their role in the policy making, and he tried to control them and to decrease their influence. Policies were made by elected representatives. So policies basically were made by the elected representatives. It was the thing introduced by the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto that elected representatives are only capable to make policies for the state. Eradicated this class to make a classless society. So he introduced such reforms to just to decrease the influence of the bureaucrats and to achieve his goal of classless society. It was the most successful reform of Bhutto. So it was very popular and the successful reform of Bhutto because he, due to such steps, he controlled the bureaucracy of Pakistan. Land reforms, he introduced land reforms in two different phases, and we can also say that he introduced land reforms twice in the state. So salient features of the land reforms in 1972. So it was the first time when land reforms were introduced by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. 150 acres irrigated and 300 acres non-irrigated. So it was the limit which was specified for the feudal lords and all the landowners that they can occupy 150 acres of irrigated land, and after that they can occupy 300 acres of non-irrigated land. No compensation to landowners, so there was no compensation was introduced for the landowners who were giving their lands to the state. Untenanted resumed land redistributed. So there was the land which was not tenanted or that was redistributed. After that, share system remained unchanged. Expenditures to be shared equally. So everything was changed and new things were introduced in the form of the land reforms. The second phase of land reforms, so after the introduction of first land reforms, he introduced land reforms again, which was the second time in the history that following are the features of Land Reforms Act 1977. So these are the features of the land reforms: 100 acres irrigated and 200 acres non-irrigated lands. So now the number of the acres was decreased, and there was only 100 acres were allowed to carry by one person in the form of the irrigated land. After that, 200 acres were specified for the non-irrigated lands. Compensation to landowners on resumed land. So for the resumed land, the compensation was awarded to the landowners after that redistribution as in 1972. So for the land which was not tenanted, so redistribution was occurred again as it was in 1972. Promotion of modern technology. He introduced modern technology in the state, and these reforms were successful in Balochistan and NWFP and set new records. So his reforms were very successful in Balochistan and NWFP, but otherwise these reforms were not popular and successful in Sindh and Punjab, because these feudal lords were against the strategies of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and they stood against these reforms and they didn't accept it heartedly. After that, replaced the landlord society. Due to these reforms, he replaced the landlord society and he changed the environment. But in fact, it was not successful reforms by the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, because the landlords and the feudal lords awarded their land to their servants and their family members. So due to such things, these reforms were not successful, and they occupied their lands again due to their influence in the society. So it was a failure of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Economic reforms nationalized the private sector. So after that, after the reforms about military, reforms about bureaucrats, and reforms about different land lords and lands, so he introduced some economic reforms which are given below. Nationalized the private sector. So to do something in the economic sector of the Pakistan, he introduced this thing. He nationalized the private sector. He nationalized all the banks. He nationalized all the industries in the state. So introduced this thing, that nationalization. He adopted the policy of the nationalization in the state. Due to this thing, he was labeled as a communist, because in a communist state there is a trend of the nationalization, and they hold all the assets of the state, and they do not give rights to the personal rights to the people, and the people do not have the rights over their properties, and so everything remains in the hands of the government, and so that's why he adopted this thing. Due to such policy, he was labeled as a communist. So after that, 31 major industries were taken under the government. So it was a number of the industries which were taken under the government, and all the industries like textiles, sugar mills, like banks, and other all the major industries which were included in this number. So all these industries were nationalized. Encouraged new businessmen. Due to his policies, he encouraged new businessmen in the society, and he introduced such reforms and a favorable environment for the new businessmen, and it was obviously a good time for the new businessmen to do business and to gain different privileges. Government tried to control inflation. Government was due to the nationalization, it was a big challenge for the government to control inflation, so they tried their best to control it, but they failed to do so. Results were not in accordance with the expectations. So Bhutto was considering it to be very easy and to apply such thoughts and policies, but it was a big challenge for the government to enforce all these policies virtually, but they failed to do so, and they could not become successful in the state. Results were worst, and they were against the expectations. So the Bhutto's government was failed to do such thing. Government was unable to fight against flood and drought. So due to the reforms and different other things, government was unable to fight against the natural disasters. So they failed to control flood and drought, and after that foreign aids and loans. So they relied on the foreign aids and loans, but the World Bank during this time period they refused to give loan to the Pakistan, and they also refused to help Pakistan. So but Pakistan was uh, expecting loans from the foreign countries, and the main reason behind this thing was the nationalization of the Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, because it halted the foreign investment in the state, and it also halted the different uh, investors to come into the state to invest their money. Financial issues were aggravated, so due to these reforms different financial issues were also aggravated in the state, and it was not the financially favorable for the state, which was already struggling for the survival. So these are the references of the books and the websites where the material was taken. So thank you so much.